Right, so would Keir Starmer make such a smug statement as he has done here if he genuinely feared any legal repercussions for his conduct? Another way of looking at this particular story is that the former human rights lawyer, as Keir Starmer is, has completely sold out on his human rights views, if he ever genuinely had any to begin with. Because he has, in my view, damned himself utterly, and if there truly was any justice in the world, he'd be heading to court for what he's just said. Because what he has stood up in Parliament and stated, protected by parliamentary privilege as it is in my view the language of the war criminal. The language of the genocidalist, and all hidden behind that mantra that is pervading our politics and our mainstream media narratives, that gets shoehorned in every time such terminology gets mentioned, and that is that Israel has the right to defend itself, or herself, as Starmer likes to put it, to national irritation. But the trouble with that is, when they are attacking everyone around them who criticises them, attacking militarily on 8 fronts currently, when they are the perpetrators and not the victims, despite you desperately clinging to the night of October 7th as the single reference point of any importance, it ignores the 12 months that have followed that concern so many of the rest of us. What Starmer has said deserves to land him in a court of law. He's protected from that by parliamentary privilege here. But the court of public opinion is a very different matter.
Speaker, on the anniversary of the horrific October the 7th attacks, I again repeat the call for the immediate release of all hostages. And in light of Israel's genocidal assault in Gaza, the violence in the West Bank and the invasion of Lebanon, I asked the Prime Minister if he believes that Israel's right to self-defense justifies a death toll, according to research by US medical professionals who have worked in Gaza, has now surpassed 118,000, as well as the 2,000 people killed in Lebanon. And will he do what is morally and legally right and end the government's complicity in war crimes by banning all arms sales to Israel, including F-35 fighter jets, not just 30 licenses, yes or no?
Minister.
No. But it is a really serious point. Banning all sales would mean none for defensive purposes.
F-35 fighter jets.
None for defensive purposes on the anniversary of October the 7th.
Exactly.
And days after a huge attack by Iran into Israel would be the wrong position for this government, and I will not take it.
Right, so that was Keir Starmer there, nailing on the fact he is not going to budge one iota, not going to move whatsoever on the matter of arms sales to a genocidal regime that needs to be stopped. Zahra Sultan, currently sitting as an independent MP and likely to remain so as she continues to hold Starmer and his rancid right-wing warmongering government to account, sitting as an independent MP for daring to vote against keeping kids in poverty, I might add, put it to Starmer there that on the night of October 7th, on the anniversary of that night, that she wants all hostages released. I like the fact she didn't specify the ones held by Hamas that may have survived their own government bombing their locations, because it's never really been about saving the hostages after all. I think we all know that now. So it could have also been referring therefore to the many thousands of Palestinians held in detention by Israel itself. But she put to Starmer whether he believes that Israel's right to self-defense excuses their actions in Gaza and Lebanon, justifies the death toll in Gaza, according to figures provided by unnamed US medical professionals, as she cited, but that certainly sit within the official figures of some 41,000 and those estimated by the medical journal The Lancet several months ago, as well as the current death toll in Lebanon, rising daily as that also is. Sultana asked Starmer a yes or no question, perhaps unfortunate in a way as it excused him to not answer the first part of the question she asked him. But she asked him, yes or no, would he now do what is morally and legally right and end the government's complicity in war crimes by banning all arms sales to Israel, including F-35 jets, and not just the 30 licenses the UK has already banned? Would Starmer do what was morally and legally right? And he simply said no. That Starmer admits to being an amoral criminal might not come as much of a shock, but that's essentially what he did there. That's what he did there in effect. Now, parliamentary privilege means he faces no such charges on any such thing. But it should horrify anyone who watches that clip, because how he said it was so arrogant. It was so smug. He was delighted to give what amounted to a slap in the face, not just to Sultana who asked the question, but to everyone demanding this government stop shaming this nation with its bought and paid for complicity in Israeli atrocity. Starmer's defence to such accusations, and I thought it was particularly telling that we got brays of hear coming from the Tory benches opposite when Starmer said no, is always that Israel has a right to defend itself. Weapons of self-defence are therefore permitted. That's his loophole. That's his get-out-of-jail-free card. But we don't actually know what we're sending generally across all the arms export licenses still in place, though of course we are aware of the parts for F-35 fighter jets being produced there. It's an international project to construct these jets, and amongst the bits we produce here are the bomb release cradles for these jets. So how exactly is that a defensive product, and how can we ensure Israel only use the weapons we send for defensive purposes? Because of course we can't. I suppose if Israel were attacked first, then a response would be defensive. That would be appropriate. They have their right to defend themselves, haven't they? But of course, that hasn't been what has been happening, has it? Starmer makes much of the anniversary of the night of October 7th, an incursion by Hamas which saw them take hostages, which is a war crime and should be condemned. But Israel's actual response to that was, as investigations have shown since, to sign off on Hannibal directives to kill their own people on that night as well, to stop them being taken hostage. So it isn't all about Hamas on that night, even if Starmer likes to portray that as very much the picture. What we saw was video footage of people fleeing the Nova Music Festival and being shot at by Israel from their own helicopter gunships. What we saw were buildings being detonated and set on fire. Hamas being accused of doing that, but they had no means to do such damage when they were there to take hostages. And we know from all the bodies that were recovered by Israel later on that they accidentally recovered a number of Hamas bodies along with their own, not realising who they'd actually picked up. A massive, glaring, foot-in-mouth event that pretty much exposed them to be the perpetrators of that. The hostages were taken with the intent of being exchanged for those Israeli prisoners, those Israeli hostages, as prisoners is how they always get referred to, though. But so many of them are held without charge, they are hostages, in effect. That was the response expected from Israel. Another hostage exchange, as has happened numerous times before. Any Israelis successfully taken hostage by Hamas and not killed by their own side to prevent it, such as the value placed on their lives by the Israeli regime, and has been ongoing, if you can look at what Israel have been doing in terms of trying to actually rescue these people alive, would be traded back for their own people, be they from Gaza or the West Bank. Instead, Israel began a genocide. There's no defence argument there. There never has been. It took a long time to get any real information pertaining to what exactly did happen on the night of October 7th. Israel did its best to cover it up. The camera footage from that night all mysteriously having vanished. Israel conducting their own investigation and the whole world saying, yes, fine, they can mark their own homework, and blocking the UN from coming in and doing an independent assessment instead. That, combined with the attacks that readily occurred on schools, on churches, on mosques and homes in Gaza at Israeli hands, rapidly saw Israel's reputation and the sympathy globally that was felt towards them as a result of, frankly, decades of propaganda, as we now know, evaporated. So what was Keir Starmer's response then? Well, I'm sure you remember this.
I'm very clear. Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is and to stand with the world in condemning, utterly condemning, these actions by Hamas.
We're never going to let him forget it. We're never going to let him forget that he never apologised for it, because Keir Starmer never says sorry. And functionally, his tune has never changed, so why would he have done? He mentions the attack from Iran as well in his response, because goodness knows we have to paint Iran as the boogeyman in all of this. And sure, it's a country with issues. Its human rights record is not good. But Iran have only ever attacked Israel directly twice in their entire history. And on both of those occasions, it has happened this year. Once in April, following Israel striking the Iranian embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus, Israel attacking first, and again this month in response to the assassination carried out by Israel in the Iranian capital of Tehran of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh that happened in July. Again, Israel struck first. What about Iran's right to defend itself here then? Let's look at Lebanon too. Sure, Hezbollah have been attacking Israel, but that was a response to the genocide they began in Gaza. Solidarity with the Gazan people, their allies, though they're mere proxies for Iran if you listen to our mainstream media. The propaganda spread, because even if that were true, it doesn't actually change anything. Hezbollah attacked first, some might say. They attacked because Israel attacked Gaza. Well, I'd remind you that Hezbollah came into being following several Israeli attempts in the past to invade Lebanon. They attacked first. None of this started on the night of October 7th, after all. It goes back decades. The UN literally have a peacekeeping force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, and have had since 1978 to ensure Israel and Lebanon don't go to war again, and they work with the Lebanese government, not the Israeli government. What does that tell you? They'd be happy to work with Israel as it happens, but Israel don't want them. It's oversight, and that is the last thing they ever want. Zara Sultana pointed out the F-35 jets as well. Well, when you can't rely on your own government to do the right thing, some people do take matters into their own hands. Starmer's excuse for not ending the supply of these jet parts, whereas he did with other jet parts for F-16s, was because of the international nature of their construction, apparently. The other nations making other parts needed this to continue. Though it's a nonsense, of course. You could simply ensure none of the parts you make go to Israel and stop Israel having those planes in effect. Oh, but those bomb cradles and radar mechanisms and whatever else are needed for self-defense, of course. As it happens, Palestine Action might have just forced the issue. They broke into a Teledyne factory in the Wirral. Teledyne is an American arms manufacturer also making parts here for F-35s. But what Palestine Action did was cut holes in the factory roof and spray red paint inside. But the roof they cut open was to a clean room, meaning the crucial and delicate, shall we put it, components within all got contaminated and now can't be produced because they have no clean room to do it in. Now, as far as I'm aware, it's not been publicised what exactly was being made there. Composite components is all they've been referred to, I believe. So I can't say that these same bits aren't being made or can't be made elsewhere. But the nature of the F-35 supply chain is international cooperation and everyone making different bits. So it is possible Palestine Action have literally just shut down the global manufacture of F-35s, for the moment at least. Israel is up on charges of genocide at the ICJ. That's not self-defence. Self-defence doesn't get you those charges, does it? Its leaders face arrest warrants from the ICC, and all Keir Starmer can repeat is that he's on the side of those facing charges of war crimes, and that Israel's right to defend itself apparently supersedes that same right in any other country also facing Israeli aggression. Morally and legally reprehensible, as Zara Sultana pointed out. And even if an actual court of law doesn't come after Starmer for this, and frankly too many world leaders avoid the consequences of their actions on such matters, the court of public opinion will judge him accordingly. Polling today reveals if a general election were held now, we'd actually have a hung parliament. Less than 100 days into this new Labour government, and already that supermajority, in numbers terms at any rate, has evaporated. It's gone. Labour only 1% ahead of the Tories, who essentially remain leaderless still for a few days longer. Not like Rishi Sunak's doing much except coasting at this point. And the contenders there are even more extremist than those who came before. That party is only going to get ever more worse. Starmer is going to go down in history as one of the most hated prime ministers ever. And for good reason. It's not like the US administration of Joe Biden are going to be remembered any more fondly regarding Israel either, though. But where Starmer can be snide and smug towards what remains of the left of his own party, Zara Sultana's suspension notwithstanding, the US are currently trying to bribe Israel to not do anything more stupid with regards to Iran. Literally bribing them, offering them free weapons and diplomatic cover if they just tone it down a bit. It's pathetic, it's weaselly, it's par for the course of what we've come to expect from Western leaders too beholden to the Israel lobby and where Israel and Netanyahu are concerned. Get the details in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.